I'm not the kind of person who usually ends up telling stories like this. Not only has writing never been my thing, but I just don't really like telling stories, especially stories that really affect me in some type of way. You see, it happened on the eve of St. Patrick's Day more than a few years ago. It was supposed to be a night of fun and friends, and instead, it was an anxiety and fear-ridden night. Instead of drinking Guinness, we were lost on dark country roads with our phones not working and the gas tank close to empty. And to make this horrible night even worse, it was topped off with an encounter that I wish I could forget. And so I'll do my best in telling the story, and maybe you'll think I'm overreacting, but if you put yourself in my shoes, I'm sure you'd be scared too. Me and my friend Jess were all hyped up for the St. Patrick's Day party that was kind of on the outskirts of town. We had our green outfits on point, and we were ready to join in all the St. Patty's Day festivities. Unfortunately, neither of us were great with directions, and this was right before the era where every phone had a GPS in it. We were basically driving to this party in the middle of nowhere based on horrible directions Jess got from one of her friends. And so, there we were, driving down these winding country roads completely lost in about no time. Everything was so dark, and every turn seemed to lead us further away from any signs of life, and it felt like we were driving in circles. After what felt like hours, the gas light flickered on and panic started to set in. We hadn't seen a gas station or even another car in about an hour of driving. We couldn't risk running out of gas since we would most likely be stranded in the middle of nowhere with no way of contacting anyone. We did have our phones, but as I said earlier, they weren't smartphones yet, and we had no service at all. I decided my best course of action would be to just shut the car off and figure out a game plan. I pulled over to the side of the road, and me and Jess started to catch our breath and talk about what we should do next. And that's when things took a turn for the downright terrifying. You see, out of nowhere, this massive SUV with these blindingly bright lights pulled up behind us. At first we thought, okay, maybe these people were here to help. But something about the whole situation just immediately felt off. The SUV just idled there for what felt like forever before the driver just gets out. It was probably about 2 minutes, but it did feel a lot longer. This person was large, and they started walking toward our car, and every instinct I had was screaming that something was not right here. Jess started begging that I drive away, but for some reason, I went against my better judgment and stayed put. It was so dark and the lights from the SUV were so bright that I couldn't tell if this person might have been a cop. At this point, it was just a large, dark silhouette. I locked the doors and I cracked the window just a bit, ready to say that we didn't need help and that we were fine, unless it was a cop and could help us with directions. But as the person got closer, that wave of fear just washed over me. When he reached us and stood just inches from the window, Jess shouted through the crack, "Hey, we're all set, thanks." But that person didn't say a word. Nothing. Instead, they reached for the door handle, immediately trying to force it open. In the few seconds that this all took place, I was able to see the man trying to open my door. The entire time he tried getting into my car, he made direct eye contact with me. He had these huge eyes that almost looked sad in the moment, and that's the only way I can describe them. He had a large overgrown beard, and it wasn't well trimmed. Jess was screaming, and it broke me from my trance. And then without thinking, I started the car and slammed my foot on the gas, peeling out of there like a bat out of hell. And we drove nonstop for about 20 minutes until by some miracle we were able to find a gas station. The entire drive we didn't see anyone following us, but we weren't 100% certain. While we were at the gas station, even though it wasn't busy, every time we saw a vehicle approach with their bright headlights, our hearts would just stop, thinking it was the SUV coming back for us. Thankfully, it never did, at least not that we knew of. We never did find out who that person was or what they wanted, but I'd never been so scared in my life. The rest of the night was just a blur of fear and adrenaline. We contacted the police, but they really couldn't do anything, and it didn't seem like they even cared. It was the eve of St. Patrick's Day, and they had bigger fish to fry. We didn't talk much about it, and to this day, we still really don't. St. Patrick's Day is supposed to be all about fun and games, but for us, it was a close encounter that I still can't believe actually happened to me, and I can't believe we got away unharmed, other than that mental anguish, I'd say. And it's crazy because you hear stories about close calls and creepy encounters, but you never think it's going to happen to you. This whole encounter was maybe 2 minutes long, and yet years later it holds all this weight in my mind. I still cringe and get all tense every time I see those bright lights of an SUV drive by me, and I'll never forget that face. Just be careful out there, my friends. I never thought something like this would happen to me, and yet it did, as monsters do exist, so always lock your doors. My memories of St. Patrick's Day start when I was a kid, and my parents would take me to the parade each year. We would usually make a big deal of it. My parents would fill the cooler and meet up with some other family and friends, and I would hang out with the other kids or just sit and watch the parade and hope to get beads, candy, or anything else that they would throw out into the crowd. As I got older, I still always went with my parents, but would meet up with friends later. When I was with my friends, we would partake in the traditional Jell-O shots, as well as an assortment of other beverages to get us in the St. Patrick's Day spirit. Once I got out of school and a little older, I grew out of my party phase, but still always made sure to attend the parade. Within the last 6 to 7 years, I've been involved in not only St. Patrick's Day parade planning, but also with the day of preparation and walking in the actual parade. There is a pretty detailed process of who are walking in the parade, a certain allotment for local business and advertisers, and also a large contingent of schools, bands, and local Irish step groups, etc. And the events I'm sharing with you now took place around 2 years ago. It was the day before the parade, and we had lots of workers and volunteers helping set up and working on finishing touches. We were finishing decorating floats, had people painting on the large banners, as well as gathering candy, t-shirts, beads, and other items to throw out into the crowd. I remember that it seemed like a really hectic day compared to other years. Everyone was running around and trying to help, but it felt completely unorganized. Most people had a lanyard or a name tag to distinguish themselves as volunteers. I call this out because I remember seeing a particular person sticking out from all the hustle and the bustle. They were casually walking around, slowly peering into cars and floats and looking like they were just checking out the scenes. I walked over to them and said, "Is there anything I can help you with? I see you don't have a lanyard. Do you need one?" She popped around quickly and said, "Oh, yes please. I haven't gotten one. I'd love to help out." I asked her who she was here with and which sectors she would be helping out in. She seemed nervous and her face got red. She said her name was Leanne and she was there with Doug and really wasn't sure what she would be doing. I had no idea who Doug was, but directed her to a table with some sign-in information, and she thanked me and then walked away quickly towards the table. I went around the rest of the day, frantically trying to get everything ready. Before I knew it, it was after 7 p.m. and I needed to start locking up the facility since it was going to be an early morning the next day. As I went around to check the lights and various door locks, I kept feeling like I heard something, almost like scurrying or scratching on the floor, like there was a small animal moving around. I turned on my cell phone lights since most of the lights were now off, but didn't see anything. And then I heard a big crash coming from the opposite side of the room. I took a few steps forward with my cell phone light, but still didn't see anything. I decided to just get out of there. If it was an animal or something, I wasn't sticking around to probably get rabies. And I got home and immediately went to bed, so I wasn't super tired in the morning. I got up, showered, made myself some tea with honey, and headed back to the facility to unlock it and start getting ready for the morning. I went to the side doors, unlocked them, and went to the first bank of lights and turned them on. I felt like I heard the same scurrying sound that I'd heard the night before. I had already forgotten about being afraid that a rabid animal was going to jump on me out of nowhere. I decided to keep the bank of lights on, but slowly walked around to see if I noticed anything out of the norm. As I weaved my way around everything that filled up the entire floor space, I saw what looked to be two glowing beams in the far back corner. I couldn't tell what it was, but as soon as I looked in the direction, it was gone. I started making my way over to that side of the facility, and I heard what sounded like a tree branch snapping, but like a thick branch, almost like a bone breaking. About 5 seconds after that sound, I heard the loudest and most terrifying noise in my life. It was a blood-curdling scream that almost sounded like laughing as it came to an end. And I sprinted to the door that I had unlocked, closed it behind me, and locked it as quickly as possible. About 15 seconds after it was locked, I heard one solid bang against the door, like someone throwing their entire body weight against it. I called the police, told them what happened, and they began searching the area. At the same time, other volunteers and parade participants were showing up. After about 15 minutes, the police came out with a person in handcuffs. It was a woman who looked like she had been awake for 4 days straight. Her hair and clothes were a mess. As the police walked by me, I got a good look at her face and saw that it was the woman from the previous day, that one that I had mentioned named Leanne. I thought I had done something wrong and was going to get charged with like false imprisonment or something, and after about 45 minutes, the police said that they needed to talk to me again. I was so nervous. I think they picked up on that and told me to relax and that I did everything as I should have. They told me that the person inside was an estranged mother of one of the children that was due to show up to march with one of the bands in the parade. And they also informed me that she told them that she just wanted to talk to her daughter. But when they searched her car, they found suitcases filled with clothes and other items that almost looked like travel materials. They didn't really share much else other than they were getting into contact with the child and their guardian to inform them. They had me make another statement about what I remembered from this Leanne, which I think I found out later wasn't her real name from the day before. Apparently, she found a place to hide and stay overnight, planning to do whatever she was going to do that day. If she was trying to go undetected, I'm not sure why she screamed. Maybe she was in the midst of some kind of manic state. But anyway, this was easily the scariest thing that's happened to me in my life thus far. I still walk in the parade from time to time, but have taken a step back from volunteering as much. I'm hoping that as time moves on, I can erase that horrifying scream from my memory. When I'm alone or in the dark, I can still hear it just as clear as I did that one St. Patrick's Day. St. Patrick's Day in my hometown isn't just a holiday, it's an event. Imagine the streets and seas of green, hearing nothing but laughter and cheers, and the air thick with the smell of street food and the promise of some pretty good times. It's the one day a year where everyone, regardless of your heritage, becomes a little bit Irish. A few years ago, after the good times and clinking glasses, I stumbled into a situation that left me pretty rattled. It was supposed to be a night of celebration, but it twisted into something much darker, something that's had me looking over my shoulder ever since. My town's big on St. Patrick's Day, as I said, and I mean huge. We're talking green beer, parades, the whole 9 yards, and they even shut down the main streets around the bars so people can party without worrying about cars. It's like our own little vision of Mardi Gras, just a lot greener and colder, since we're nowhere near New Orleans. Now on this specific year, like every year, I was out celebrating with my friends. And we started early, hitting up our favorite spots, enjoying the specials, and just getting lost in the sea of people all decked out in green. It's always a good time seeing everyone letting loose and celebrating the luck of the Irish, even though I'm pretty sure I'm French. Around 10 p.m., though, you could tell the all-day drinking was taking its toll. The crowd started to thin out, and the vibe shifted from festive to, more subdued. My buddies were either too drunk to function or had already had enough excitement for one day, so they called it a night. I found myself alone and just not ready to head home yet. I stepped into this narrow alleyway beside the bar that I was at to smoke a cig. I wanted to enjoy the cool night air and the quiet after hours of constant noise. And that's when things got weird. Not necessarily scary, just very weird. Out of nowhere, these two figures turned into the alley. They stood side by side, blocking my way to the street. They were wearing these bizarre leprechaun masks and these green hats, the kind that you'd find in a kid's costume or something, and not on grown adults in a dark alleyway at night. After a few seconds, we just stood there, staring at each other. They didn't say anything, didn't move, just stood there, staring. And that's when the weirdness started to turn into some fear. People had been partying all day and night, and I had come across some strange characters, but something was very off about these two. Something was different. It was very freaky and unnerving, to say the least, and just as I was about to chuck my cig and bolt, a group of people spilled into the alley from the other direction, looking also for a place to smoke. The commotion of the other people must have startled those masked figures because they just ended up leaving, and they just sort of melted back into the night. I brushed it off, tried to laugh with the newcomers about how creepy those guys with the masks were, but deep down, I was a little freaked out. Eventually, I forgot about that strange interaction and went on with my night. I decided it was time to go home at around 1 a.m. While I was waiting for my ride outside, I remembered those figures with the leprechaun masks, and I felt a brief moment of fear and kind of started looking over my shoulder for those weirdos, and thankfully I never saw them. Now, I got home a little after 1. My place was very quiet, just the way I left it. I was still a little wired from the night, so it took me a while to wind down and get ready for bed. And that's when my phone buzzed with a notification from my Ring camera. My heart dropped to my stomach when I saw it. There, on my front porch, were the two masked guys from the alley. They weren't knocking or making a scene, and they just looked like they were trying to be quiet. I noticed one of them was trying to open my front door. He was jostling the doorknob and trying to quietly budge his way into my house. While he was doing that, I noticed that the other guy was trying to slide open the window that is next to my front door. Thankfully, the door and window were locked, and this was like something straight out of a nightmare, watching these two in their freaky masks trying to break into my home. I was on the phone with the police in seconds, but before I could even get my address out, one of them pointed directly at the camera. Somehow they had just noticed the light from that Ring camera and decided to book it, and they took off and ran away before the cops could actually get there. The police did a sweep of the area but found nothing, no sign of them anywhere, and it left me very shaken. I mean, why me? Why my house? Was it random, or had they followed me home? I had a million questions with literally zero answers. And the worst part was those stupid masks. Because of that, I had nothing to give the police. I don't know who these two people were. Either they followed me home from the bar, or they knew where I lived to begin with, which truly was even more terrifying. And now, every little noise makes me jump, and I keep replaying the events of that night over and over again in my head. The worst part is just not knowing. Not knowing who they were, why they came to my house, or what would have happened if they got in. It's messed up, feeling unsafe in your own home. And that's my story. No ghosts, no monsters, just a pair of weirdos and some masks that turned my St. Patrick's Day into something I'll never forget, but for all the wrong reasons. I'm still trying to figure out what to make of it years later. I haven't been out on a St. Patty's Day since, and I probably won't anytime soon. St. Patty's is usually a blast. Everyone's out, the streets are popping, and the bars are filled with tons of people, and the night is usually one of the best party nights of the year. Unfortunately, this year I was stuck working at the bar. Now don't get me wrong, the tips are nothing to complain about, especially on a night like that. Still, I'd have killed to be out with my friends, taking shots and dancing and being a degenerate. Instead, I'd be on the other side of the counter serving the drinks. The bar/restaurant I worked at got this dishwasher named Josh. Nice enough guy, a bit quiet, keeps to himself mostly. He's got schizophrenia, something he's pretty open about and has talked about. When he got hired, he basically told everyone there and told us a little about his condition. Usually, you just find him mumbling to himself while he works. Nothing out of the ordinary for him, and he seemed harmless. I don't know much about the condition. I don't know if this mumbling to himself is a part of his condition or if that's just Josh being Josh. But I can say, on that night, he was acting stranger than usual. He kept stepping outside to where we keep the dumpster. He was talking to the trash inside the dumpster like it was a person and not just piles of garbage. But he wasn't just mumbling this time. He looked genuinely upset, almost arguing with the garbage inside that dumpster. A couple of us noticed, and when we would walk inside, we'd ask if he was all right, and he'd just shrug us off and head back to his work area, not saying a word. This routine of Josh walking out to the dumpster continued for several hours. Every so often, he would stop what he was doing, go outside to said dumpster, and start quietly arguing. We'd seen Josh do some weird things over the years, but this was taking the grand prize for me. Things went from weird to bad later in the evening. I was out back trying to catch a break from the busy bar scene inside when Josh cornered me. His eyes were all teary and he looked scared out of his mind. He said in a shaky and almost nervous voice, "The trash man wants to get you." Knowing Josh and his condition, I figured that he was just having a very bad moment, so I tried to calm him down, tell him it was all right, but he wouldn't have it. He blocked my way, refusing to let me pass. I'm not the smallest person in the world, but Josh is a huge guy, and I wasn't getting around him or through him. I started to get really scared, not necessarily of Josh, but of the situation itself. I started to scream for help, and thankfully our manager came rushing out. He had to physically remove Josh, who by then was just inconsolable, screaming over and over that I wasn't safe. The whole ordeal had me freaked out, but I tried to just sweep it under the carpet and get back to work. I'd be lying if I told you my feathers weren't a little bit ruffled at that point, but I understood Josh has a condition and I have no idea how the highs and lows of that can affect a person. A few hours passed and the night was finally winding down and it was almost closing time. I went out back with a bag of trash, eager to get it over with and head home. And that's when everything went from bad to outright terrifying. I lifted the lid of the dumpster and out jumped a man. My heart practically exploded just on shock alone. It took me a second to recognize him, but once I was face to face with the man, it became clear. This person was my ex. The same ex that I had a restraining order against for reasons that should be obvious now. The guy was crazy, and let me be tame for the sake of the story, and I'll tell you that he was a bit of a stalker too, and I'll just leave it at that. Now anyways, I was face to face with this now horrible man, and he obviously smelled like trash, but I could still smell the overused, lingering smell of Axe body spray as well, and he was inches away from me, beginning to creep closer. I was slowly stepping back, but I was running out of room, and before I knew it, I'd be backed against a wall. I was losing my mind. I didn't know what to say, and I tried to scream, but it was like my brain had forgot how to make a noise. While I was trying to think of anything to get out of this situation, some folks started walking behind the bar. They saw me cowering against the wall and this intimidating man standing over me with something in his waistband on his backside. As they saw what was happening, they intervened. 3 guys ran over, grabbed him, and held him down, and somebody else called the police. They continued holding him until the cops arrived. And it turns out, Josh had been seeing my ex hiding in that dumpster way earlier in the night. My ex had somehow convinced Josh to just keep quiet, playing on his schizophrenia, making him doubt his own reality. That's why Josh was so fixated on the trash and why he kept going outside to make sure what he was seeing was truly real. I felt a mix of emotions afterward. I felt guilt for not taking Josh seriously, and gratitude for the strangers who had stepped in, and a whole lot of anger towards my ex. It was a mess of a night that I'm still trying to wrap my head around. And in case anyone wants to know, my ex was arrested, and he did get into some legal trouble as a result. I apologized to Josh, who accepted my apology and told me no hard feelings. The manager also apologized to Josh for basically sending him home and not listening to him. I was always skeptical about telling the story. I was worried people would judge me, and rightfully so. Trust me, if you knew Josh, you'd think the guy was just being a more intense version of himself, and I bet you wouldn't take him seriously either. St. Patrick's Day in my city is always kind of a big thing. I know probably everyone says that, but it's probably because it's true in most places. It's like everywhere just comes alive for the day. And for some reason, everyone just loves being out that entire day. Of course, drama still exists, but as a whole, it just seems like most people get along better that day. And it's why I personally have always loved St. Patty's Day. 2 years ago, I was out that night, hopping from one bar to another, just enjoying myself and living it up. I was dancing, drinking, kind of living in the moment, and that's when I met her. This girl who seemed to stand out from everyone else. She was alone, which struck me as odd because it looked like everyone else was out in groups, laughing and kind of stumbling over each other. But not her. She was just there, sipping her drink, watching the crowd with this sort of amused smile. I should admit that I'm usually horrible at trying to make a move on a person. I have no problem going out there and dancing and looking like an idiot, but talking to a girl, that's a death sentence for me. But for some reason, I approached her and made some horrible pickup line that actually worked. I'm sorry I don't remember the exact line, and knowing me, it was probably some stupid dad joke. And we hit it off almost immediately. She had this way about her, easy to talk to, laughing at my jokes, and somehow making the chaotic bar scene around us sort of just fade away. And we spent the next few hours bar hopping together, losing track of time until it was well past 2 in the morning. And that's when she asked me to walk her home. She said that she lived close and didn't want to go alone. Maybe it was the drinks or the way the night had gone, but it didn't seem weird at the time, so I agreed. She led the way, her hand grabbing mine, pulling me along. She was being cute, and this felt very special in the moment. I don't know if that's cliche or whatever, but I was really feeling it. With almost no warning, though, she veered off the main street onto this sort of dark side road. She mentioned with a whisper that it was a shortcut, and me, being none the wiser, just followed. She could have told me that there was a dragon that needed to be slain down the road, and I probably would have followed her. The streetlights were few and far between here, casting long shadows that made the whole thing feel like we were stepping into another world. That should have been my first clue that something wasn't right. And that's about when I noticed that there were no more houses in sight. It was just trees on our left and a long stone or brick wall on our right. Suddenly, she stopped and turned, grabbing my shoulders and pushing me against that brick wall that lined the road. My heart racing, thinking, this is it. A kiss or something is coming my way. But I couldn't have been more wrong. Before I knew it, 2 men jumped out from the darkness behind the fence. One of them pressing something against my side, claiming that he had a gun. I didn't actually see one, but in that moment, I wasn't about to question it. And they didn't waste any time. While the one was pressing something against my side, the other man was rifling through my pockets, taking my phone, watch, and wallet, which was everything I had. And while this was happening, the woman I was with started yelling, "Hurry up, you're taking too long." It was dark and I tried keeping my eyes closed, praying that this would just end soon. However, I did catch a glimpse of the man who was going through my pockets. He had a hood on and a beanie under the hood. He had what looked like a snake tattoo or some sort of design resembling a snake on the left side of his neck. He was clean-shaven and had these weird scars on his face. I didn't see the guy who said that he was holding a gun. All I know is that he had a hood on as well. And then, as if stealing my stuff wasn't enough, they threw me to the ground and started kicking me, over and over. Even the girl I had just spent the last few hours with was getting some shots in. I remember them telling me to stay down for 5 minutes or they'd shoot, and the fear of that moment, the helplessness, It's something I can't shake. His squeaky voice stained in my memory like some sort of scar. After they vanished back into the night, leaving me there bruised and battered, I did what they said. Stayed down, not daring to move, and every second feeling like a small eternity. I waited far longer than 5 minutes, and eventually I managed to get up and find help, calling the police to report what happened. But as these things go, nothing could really come of it. No way to track my phone, no leads on the girl or the two men. I even gave the police information about that snake tattoo and the scars and the voice and even an extremely detailed description of that girl. But it ended up just another unsolved case in a city too full of them. And looking back, I keep asking myself how I could have been so naive, so trusting. The warning signs were there, but I ignored them, caught up in the moment and the excitement of the night. It's funny, in a twisted way, how one night and one chance encounter can change everything. How it can make you question your judgment, make you see danger in every shadow and every unknown face. St. Patrick's Day will never be the same for me, not after that. And I guess the moral of this story, if there really is one, is to stay alert. Always be aware of your surroundings. And maybe, just maybe, think twice before walking someone home down a dark and unfamiliar road. So I'm not the best at articulating my experiences, but something happened last St. Patrick's Day that I still can't really shake off, and I wanted to send in to you. I figured maybe if I try and write it down and share my story, maybe some people will read it and offer some opinions on what they think. Here goes. You know how St. Patrick's Day is supposed to be all fun and games, green stuff everywhere, a lot of beer, and people pretending that they're more Irish than they actually are? Well, mine started just like that, but it turned into a nightmare before it was all over. It was just me, a pretty girl that seemed perfect, and a night that spiraled so far out of control I'm still trying to piece it all together. St. Patrick's Day in Boston is like nowhere else. The city turns into a city of green with people everywhere and, of course, every bar packed to the gills. My buddy Mike and I decided to hit the town, see where the night would take us. We weren't really looking for trouble, just a good time, some laughs, a few pints, and maybe meet some interesting people. We ended up at this place that I won't mention by name, but it was one of those overly Irish bars. Kinda over the top with all the green lights and shamrock decorations, but it was a good time and the place was buzzing. And that's where I met her. I'll just call her Sarah for the story. She was there with her friends, laughing, the life of the party kind of girl, and we hit it off right away. She had this laugh that sort of filled the room, you know what I mean? And we spent the whole night talking, dancing, and, well, drinking more than we probably should have. Mike gave me that look, the don't do anything stupid look, but I was too caught up in the moment to care. The night flew by, and before we knew it, the bar was closing. Sarah suggested that we continue the party at her place, just a few blocks away. It seemed like a great idea at the time. Her friends were all heading home, and so was Mike, and I felt those butterflies in my stomach when I realized that it was just Sarah and I. It's crazy that even at this late hour, the streets were still just bustling with people, even though there was kind of a chill in the air, a reminder that winter hadn't quite let go yet. And so, we got back to Sarah's apartment after what was honestly a pretty good night. I don't know if we were still buzzing with the St. Patrick's Day spirit or if we were both caught up in the vibe of the situation, but either way, I was feeling great. Sarah's apartment was in one of those older buildings, the kind with creaky floors and windows that never seemed to close all the way. But it had character, and she loved talking about it. We decided to call it a night, at least for drinks. We were just sitting on her couch, talking and laughing about nothing in particular. And that's when things started to get weird. At first, it was just a feeling, like we weren't alone. I know that sounds crazy, but I know you know the feeling I'm talking about. I tried to brush it off as just the buzz from the night wearing off, but then we heard it. The sound of someone else in the apartment. It was subtle at first, the faint sound of movement coming from the kitchen, and we both froze, trying to listen. I tried to play it off, suggesting that maybe it was a neighbor's noise that we were hearing, but the layout of the building made that impossible. The next sound wasn't subtle at all. A very loud sound, a sort of crash like a bunch of pots and pans hitting the floor, echoed from the kitchen. Sarah's face went immediately white, and she whispered that we needed to leave now. And that's when it hit me. She was scared because it seemed almost like this happened before. The look she gave me was a look that said, I know what's happening. But before I could ask, we heard it again, the undeniable sound of footsteps coming towards the living room. And there was no mistaking this time, someone was in the apartment with us. We didn't stick around to find out who. Sarah grabbed my hand and we ran for the door. She fumbled with the locks, and for some reason, she had so many locks. I remember thinking this was weird for an apartment in a supposedly safe part of town. We got out and didn't stop running until we reached the street, where we were met with a surreal sight of various partygoers well into the early hours of the morning. It's a strange feeling seeing all of those people having a good time, completely oblivious to the horror that we'd just escaped. We called the police, and they found no one when they checked the apartment later. No sign of forced entry, nothing stolen, just a kitchen in complete disarray. They suggested that maybe we had scared off some burglar, someone who thought the apartment was empty but later got scared when they heard us in the living room. But the look in Sarah's eyes told me that she didn't believe that, and neither did I. There was something that felt very personal about it. Again, I know that's just a feeling, but it was an overwhelming feeling. And the night shattered something for me, the sort of illusion of safety that you feel when you're inside, locked away from the world. And I keep replaying it over in my head, wondering what would have happened if we hadn't left when we did. I haven't been back to Sarah's apartment since, and we haven't really talked to each other for some time. In fact, I just don't think I will call her back. It's like we're both trying to pretend it didn't happen, but it did, and something was never quite right after that incident. I think about her often, and honestly, I just hope she's okay. I have no clue what she could possibly know. It's kind of just a gut feeling. Maybe it was just a horrible robbery that we both escaped from, but I have a hard time accepting that, clearly. And I guess that's why I can't sleep right anymore. Not because I think someone's going to break into my place, but because I know that sometimes even the places we consider safe can turn into scenes right out of a nightmare. And the scariest part, we'll never find out why. Back in 2010, one of the craziest things that's ever happened in my life happened. I never really considered it scary, but just kind of insane. And I've been telling this story for years, and usually the people I tell are shocked and surprised that I wasn't more scared at that moment. I guess in hindsight it was thrilling, and all things considered, I'm lucky nothing serious happened to me. It was one of those rare times when my parents decided to hit the town and leaving me with the house to myself. It was St. Paddy's Day, and my extremely Irish parents liked to celebrate. Naturally, I called up my buddies, Jake and Connor. We were your typical high school seniors. Well, I guess not really. We were more into video games than actual adventures. The three of us never partied or really did anything wild. Not that we weren't invited, we just didn't care. It wasn't our thing. But that night, something was different in all of us. I don't know if we were fueled by the spirit of St. Patrick or an unusual dose of teenage restlessness, but we wanted to step it up, do something memorable for once. A couple of houses down from mine, there's this place that's always given off major abandoned vibes. Overgrown lawn, curtains that just never moved, and a mailbox overflowing with what I assumed was junk. We'd always joked about checking it out, seeing what secrets it held. The rumor since I was like 5 was that the place was haunted. Obviously, none of us believed that, but it was fun campfire stories. That night, we decided that we were actually going to do it. We were going to break in. Not to swipe anything, just to, I don't know, explore, I guess. The adrenaline was pumping as we crept over to the house. The door was surprisingly easy to open, just a nudge really, and we were in. and the air inside was stale, heavy with dust, and it smelled horrible, like a mixture of trash and body odor. It was dark, but not completely. There was this eerie glow from somewhere that gave enough light to see. But perhaps the most terrifying thing in that moment was that the place looked lived in, which freaked us out because it was supposed to be empty. Well, at least we always assumed it was empty since none of us had ever seen anybody come or go. Things were way too tense, and we were just about to bail when we heard it. The unmistakable sound of feet. And panic mode kicked in. We ducked behind this old, moth-eaten sofa, and through the dim light we saw him. Some old man. He was a smaller and creepy-looking man, and he had this long gray beard and long white hair that looked knotted and disgusting. He was hunched over and walking with a bad limp. He was clutching what looked like a rifle and sort of muttering under his breath, saying stuff like, "I know you're here. Show yourself." Now our hoods were up, thankfully, so I felt like our faces were sort of hidden. We were trespassers, no doubt, but at that moment, we felt like the ones in danger. Clearly, this man had a right to shoot us if he felt threatened, at least in our state. And why wouldn't he feel threatened? 3 young men were inside his home. 3 young men that were on the larger side. We waited, trapped in our hiding spot, until the footsteps moved away and the old man's voice and heavy breathing started to fade. And that was our chance. We sprinted out of there, not looking back, not stopping until we were safely inside my house with the door locked behind us. Jake said that he saw the old guy trying to follow, but he couldn't keep up. And pumped up from the experience and fear, we couldn't just call it a night. We watched the house from my bedroom window, and curiosity was getting the better of us. And that's when the night took another turn. Several police cars with lights flashing pulled up outside the old man's place. I had to know what was going on, so I went outside, mingling with the neighbors gathering around. And that's when I saw them. The police were escorting a young couple out in handcuffs. One of the nosy neighbors filled me in. The couple apparently had been squatting in the old man's basement for weeks, stealing food from him and causing this poor old man some pretty serious grief. The old guy knew something was off but couldn't prove it, and he couldn't even make it down to the basement himself. So he was just forced to hear these sounds and try to convince himself that he wasn't crazy yet. And here's the kicker. The old man was convinced that there was a third member of their little criminal spree because he'd seen us, the 3 kids in hoods, earlier in the night. He thought the 2 people being arrested were 2 of us and that the third was still loose. I selfishly felt relieved that he didn't suspect it was us inside the house. It also turned out that those squatters were armed with a knife, adding a whole new level of danger to our stupid stunt. I walked back home with my head completely spinning. The old man had every reason to be scared, just not of us. And we, thinking we were just messing around, could have walked into something way worse, either from the old man's self-defense perspective, or if we accidentally stumbled upon those squatters who knows what they would have done. We never told anyone about breaking in that night. There was a little silent agreement among us to just forget it and move on. But the what-ifs always got to me. It's why I always told this story at parties, and it's why I'm telling it now. What if we'd been caught by those squatters instead of the old man? What if the situation had turned violent? It's a little St. Paddy's Day adventure that turned into a real-life crime drama in my mind, and it makes you think twice about the secrets hidden behind closed doors. And as for me and my buddies, we decided to just stick to video games for the rest of high school. Real-life adventures are overrated, not to mention way too risky, at least for my liking. I had just moved to this new town shortly before St. Patrick's Day. It's a small place, the kind where everybody seems to know each other, and I was just the new guy trying to fit in. St. Paddy's Day came around, and the whole town was filled with seemingly excitement. Being a bit on the anxious side, I decided to kind of lay low. It didn't feel right going out when I barely knew anyone yet. I don't want to be that weird guy in the corner trying to fit in, so I decided to just stay home by myself, watching some old movies, and eventually I would just crash on the couch. It sounds like an awesome St. Patrick's Day, right? It must have been around 3 in the morning when I woke up to this very strange noise outside. At first I thought it was just the wind or something, but then I heard it again, clearer this time, a kind of scratching noise, like someone was messing with the lock on my front door. I tried telling myself that it was an animal, like maybe a raccoon or something, but the sounds were way too deliberate for that. My heart started racing, and I remembered thinking, this can't be happening. I crept up to the window, very quiet-like, and peeked through the blinds. And that's when I saw them. This group of teenagers, at least 8 of them I counted, but honestly, it could have been more. They were all huddled around my front porch at first, a couple of them messing with the door while the others were keeping watch. It didn't look like they were just pulling a prank. They were seriously trying to break into my house. At least that's what it appeared at first. And panic began to set in very quickly. I didn't know these kids, and I had no idea what they wanted or why they were targeting me. I'm not some big, intimidating guy. I'm just an average person. If you weren't looking in my direction, I would blend into the wall, and here I was, alone with a group of people trying to break in. Not to mention they were clearly teenagers. So I didn't know how to move forward with this situation. Calling the police seemed like the obvious choice, but my phone was charging in the kitchen, way too close to the front door for comfort. So I did the only thing I could think of. I banged on the window as hard as I could, shouting for them to get lost and that I had already called the cops. And surprisingly, it worked. Kind of. They scattered, but not before one of them turned and gave me this look, like he was sort of memorizing my face or something. It was the weirdest, and if I'm being honest, most terrifying thing I'd ever witnessed. I know it sounds weird, but the look in his eyes still haunts me. I watched them disappear into the night before I had the guts to move, to finally grab my phone and call the police. I made my way into the kitchen to grab my phone and just about fell over when I noticed 3 more teenagers at the back sliding door trying to open it. It was a blonde girl and 2 husky fellows. They were wearing black hoodies and gray sweatpants, and I tried the same approach as before, and yelling that I'd called the police, even though I hadn't yet. But this time they didn't seem fazed. The girl said something like, "Just hurry up." I couldn't really tell, it was muffled, and I couldn't believe what was happening. Instead of standing there like a deer in headlights, I went for my phone, calling the police. At that point, the 3 teens finally stopped trying to get into the sliding door. One of the boys waved and smiled, and then they ran away just like the others I saw on the front door. As I got off the phone with the police, I noticed some of the teenagers in the street in front of my house. They were laughing, doing a sort of poor version of like an Irish step dance. And this was my St. Patrick's Day gift, I guess. I realize the thought of a bunch of kids dancing outside my house may seem comical to some who hear this, but just imagine 10+ teenagers outside your home in the middle of the night, trying to break in, and just being utterly freaks. You try laughing in a situation and see what happens. I didn't want to take that chance. The cops showed up pretty quick. They took my statement and said that they'd look into it, but I could tell that they didn't think it was a big deal. Just some kids causing trouble and no harm done. They promised to patrol the area more frequently for a while and then left me there in my too quiet house with the adrenaline still pumping through my veins. I didn't sleep for the rest of the night, and every little sound I thought was the kids coming back. And those little monsters had me peering through the blinds like some paranoid freak. The next day, I asked around, trying to figure out if this was a common thing in the area, some sort of prank, but everyone seemed as surprised as I was. Things like that don't happen here, they'd say. But it had happened, and right on my front porch. The scariest part isn't even that it happened, though. It's just wondering why. Law enforcement kind of just chalked it up to a bunch of kids amusing themselves by scaring the new guy in town, but I feel like it was something more, and what would have happened if they'd gotten in. Those questions just kept spinning in my head, keeping me up at night. And since then, I've been second-guessing my decision to move here, to the small town where I thought that I'd find some peace and quiet. And instead, I found myself facing this sort of nightmare scenario right outside my door. I've started taking the necessary precautions, like double-checking my locks and installing a couple of extra security lights and cameras and stuff like that. And maybe it's an overkill, but I don't care. I never want to feel that vulnerable again. Hey friends, thanks for listening. Click that notification bell to be alerted of all future narrations. I release new videos every Monday and Thursday at 7 p.m. EST, and there are super fun live streams every Sunday and Wednesday nights. If you got a story, be sure to submit them to my subreddit, r/LetsReadOfficial, or send it over email, and you might even hear your story featured on the next video. And if you want to support me even more, grab early access to all future narrations and bonus content over on Patreon, or click that big join button to hear about the extra perks offered for the channel. And check out the Let's Read podcast, where you can hear all of these stories and big compilations located anywhere you listen to podcasts. All links in the description below. Thanks so much, friends. And remember, I live in a trash can.